She lay like that for a few more moments before deciding that she needed to know where she was. Slowly, she peeked her head up. She was in a library, from the looks of the rows and rows of books. A bed in a library? The whole thing seemed absurd. Then she couldn't complain. She half thought of trying to sleep again, but rejected the idea with a shiver. She didn't want to face the dreams again. It had only been exhaustion that had saved her from them this time, but now no. She would get her books and hat and cloak, and she would sleep soundly again. She slipped out of the bed and unsteadily landed on her hooves. She paused, noticing a mirror, and slowly walked towards it. The sight of the haggard pony that looked back at her nearly sent her careening back underneath the sheets. Her hair had grown far too long, and it was worn and grizzled, the silver looking more like grey. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, her blue pelt was matted, there were obvious nicks and cuts all along her legs. Perhaps worst of all, she swore she could count her ribs. She blinked, trying not to cry, and she noticed that someone had taken the time to clean her, but it had clearly been an awkward situation with her being unconscious. Trixie exhaled softly. Once she was the great and powerful Trixie again, she was going to take a long time to recover physically, but she would. The great and powerful Trixie could do anything. Do even everything that Trixie couldn't. She trotted to the door of the room she had woken in and peered out. She was definitely in a library. The room she was in was an offshoot of the main library. She slipped out into the main room, walking slowly and carefully, and froze. Sitting in a desk was her enemy. The lovely purple unicorn that had shown her up. Twilight Sparkle was reading a book, flipping the pages with her magic, and Trixie stood there just watching and feeling her heart pattering fiercely in her chest. Some of the warmer dreams that she had been having racing through her head. She tore her gaze away, shaking her head fiercely. She couldn't! She felt the warmth in her haunches, and the red started to form in her cheeks. Forcing her eyes away from Twilight, she instead turned to the desk that she was reading from. Carefully piled up on top of the desk were a small pile of carefully maintained books and a vivid midnight purple cloak with a hat placed on top. Twilight had them. She was reading through her mother's books. She just had to reach out and take them from her, and she could be great again. "Those are mine, Twilight Sparkle," Trixie called out, almost horrified at how weak and raspy her voice was. Her enemy blinked and turned around, concern etched on her face, the same sort of concern that Trixie had previously seen in that orange pony. "Trixie, you're awake. Are you all right? What happened to you?" she asked, and Trixie shivered, almost backing up, as if the compassion in Twilight's voice were physically affecting her. The anger that had momentarily flared up inside Trixie was nearly extinguished, but she tried her best to fan it with the last scraps of her pride. "What do you care? The great and powerful Trixie doesn't need your compassion." She sounded so weak. "I care because Applejack found you passed out and half dead on her farm, and I was concerned about you before. You ran away before we could talk." She gestured with a hoof towards a pile of books on her desk. I thought your name was familiar. The books in your trailer surprised me, so I looked it up. I didn't know your... Give those back to me!" Trixie cried out, her horn wearily sparking back to life. The books and clothes flew from the desk, her hat and cloak wrapping around her body, the books landing near her. She quivered softly, arching her back, puffing her chest out proudly. She was the great and powerful Trixie once more. She didn't feel any different. In fact, wrapped in the outfit her mother had worn, that she had inherited, all she could think about was how much she missed her. How much it still hurt when she thought about Trixie. Are you crying?" Twilight gasped softly. Blue Unicorn shook her head, but it was futile. The tears were streaming down her cheeks, drooping onto the floor of the library. So this was it. The great and powerful Trixie was gone. She'd been fooling herself into thinking that she could bring her back. All that was left was weak, lonely Trixie. "Trixie, what's wrong?" "Oh, you silly pony, please tell me what's the matter." Twilight slowly walked forward, approaching the shaking unicorn. She reached out with a hoof, reaching out to touch her comfortingly. Trixie felt the warmth, the concern, and the last bit of resistance broke. She launched herself at the surprised Twilight, the books at her feet being knocked over, the hat off her head flying off. And she began to sob fiercely, pressing her body against Twilight's. Twilight wrapped her hooves tenderly around the crying Trixie. It didn't matter who this was, and the trouble she had caused for Twilight the first time they had met. She held Trixie tightly, whispering comforting noises to Trixie as the cloak-clad unicorn sobbed, letting out the pain that had been tearing her insides apart. Soon, the sobs quietened, and the tears started to slow, but Trixie didn't move, and Twilight didn't release her. For the first time, in a long time, Trixie felt really warm. Trixie didn't know how long the two stayed like that, but it felt like hours. She was pretty sure that she'd fallen asleep for a while, but surrounded by Twilight's warmth, the dreams hadn't come back. She was feeling lighter now, as if a giant weight had been removed from her shoulders. Slowly, and with great reluctance, Trixie pulled away from Twilight, briefly looking ashamed. "You must think I'm pathetic," Trixie whispered, but Twilight shook her head gently. "No, it's all right, Trixie. You've been through a lot, and you needed to get it out. Every pony has to, sometimes. You going to be all right?" The tenderness in her voice was evident, and Trixie decided to be honest. "I don't know. I don't know what to do," she admitted both to herself and to Twilight. It was odd, though. It was a liberating feeling. "I don't think I can be great and powerful Trixie again." Twilight smiled gently and flicked her horn, the fallen hat rising off the floor and gently landing on her head. "I don't think it's right to ignore your gifts. You are a very talented pony, after all. Maybe it would be better to figure out what the great and powerful Trixie should be. I think Midnight would have preferred that." Trixie blinked in surprise as Twilight continued. "I didn't realize that she was your mother." You know about her?" Trixie asked, slightly shocked with faint blush on her cheeks, but she wasn't the only one. Twilight's cheeks were turning slightly red. I got to see her when she performed in Canterlot when I was a little filly. I had a picture up on my wall for ages." Twilight's eyes turned to the floor and she looked slightly downcast. I was really sad when I heard what happened. I think I cried for a week. I'm really sorry, Trixie. I can't imagine what it would have been like." Trixie snuffed slightly, tears leaking down her cheeks, but she was smiling. The good memories of her mother playing through her mind, the good times, the love and warmth. "I miss her," she said, looked at Twilight. "But for the first time in a long time, it doesn't hurt as much. Maybe you could tell me about her? I think I would like that." They spoke throughout Celestia's day, and even deep into Luna's night. It felt good to share the stories that she had hidden so deeply inside for so long to such an attentive listener. Sometimes they would burst out laughing, and sometimes Trixie would end up in Twilight's arms again, weeping softly, but it felt right. They'd even begun to speak of magic, reading through Midnight's books. Trixie described the effects that she had remembered. It had been far too long since she actually read the books, instead of just possessing them. But being with Twilight and the lightness she was feeling for the first time made her want to learn more, to truly become the great and powerful Trixie her mother had seen in her, even when Trixie herself misunderstood. It was dark out when Trixie looked out the window, glancing towards the setting sun. "I should probably go and get out of your hair. Now that I have what I came for, I should leave," she said with great reluctance. Twilight blinked and then shook her head fiercely. "You don't have to, you know. In fact, you're still not healthy. You really shouldn't. But even still, why don't you stay? I mean, it would be nice to have a friend with the same sorts of interests, and you could be a research assistant or a partner if you wanted." Trixie's heart patted slightly and she bit her lip, looking out the window. "Well, your friends and the others, they're probably going to hate me for what I did last time I was here." Twilight smiled tenderly and reached out, putting her hoof over Trixie's own, making the blue filly look at her. "You don't give them or you enough credit. I learned a lot about friendship being here, and one of the lessons I've learned is that friendship, even more, can come over the most unlikely places." She looked into Trixie's eyes gently. Trixie's heart was beating harder, and their muzzles were so close. All Trixie had to do was lean forwards, but she didn't think she had the bravery to do it. So Twilight did it instead. Trixie's eyes flied wide open as their lips met, and their bodies started to press up against one another, Twilight's front legs resting around Trixie's neck. They stayed like that for what seemed like an eternity until Twilight slowly pulled away, smiling softly at Trixie. Trixie shivered slightly, and then leaned herself tightly against Twilight, letting out a soft laugh. Alright, you win. I'll stay. Congratulations. Congratulations? You managed to truly defeat the great and powerful Trixie. You're the first to do so, save Trixie herself. The two ponies giggled softly, and then leaned in for another kiss, and Trixie knew that if she ever got cold again, there'd be someone there to warm her. The end. This was Thankwell reading Out in the Cold by Esper Derek. Tune in next time.